Good evening and welcome to What the Friday. Now, by the time you're hearing this, the kids and I will be in Maggie Valley on a mini vacation. Tonight's episode is about the mysterious disappearance of a young lady that happened back in 1993. It involves a young woman named Hung Lee, who was only 17 years old at the time that she vanished without a trace.
Welcome to What the Friday, an After Dark series presented by Mystery, Murder, and Magic. Listener discretion is advised.
Hung Lee disappeared on January the 12th, 1993. She had moved to the United States with her family as a young child from Laos. Hung wasn't the typical Asian American for those days. She had the big teased hair, her bangs were dyed red, and she loved heavy metal like Metallica and other bands from that generation. And at that time, the hairstyle and color, along with Hung's fashions, were frowned upon by the Asian community. Hung was one of 14 children. They all lived with their parents in a Minnesota housing project, and by her appearance and the fact that she smoked, many thought that she was a so-called bad girl. But Hung was quite the opposite. She held down an after-school job at a local restaurant. On payday, she would give her earnings to her dad so he could keep the family's kitchen full of food to eat. On the day that she disappeared, she was waiting to hear from a friend who worked at a local business as a secretary because the friend had told her that she thought she could get Hung a job there to supplement her earnings from her restaurant job. When the friend called that day, the two made plans to meet with her friend's boss later that evening. It was well known that Hung was a very trusting person, as many people are at that age. And a lot of people would mistake that for her being naive. But Hung wasn't naive, and she always carried a pocket knife with her for her protection, and for good reason. Now, Hung was somewhat on the small side. She stood only 5 feet tall, and she weighed around 90 pounds. Soon she left to meet with her friend and her friend's boss, and that was the last time anyone saw her. Not a phone call, not a word was heard from Hung. Hung's mom didn't speak English, so one of Hung's siblings took their mom to report her as missing. The feeling that Hung's family got from the police at that time that they reported her missing was that they thought she was just another runaway. Well, the days turned into months. 6 of them, as a matter of fact, and that's when detectives showed up at the Lee home to talk to Hung's mother. Apparently, the friend that she was supposed to meet that night had seen the missing posters around town, and she started feeling kind of bad about it, and she contacted the police. This friend gave the police the name Mark Stephen Wallace. Wallace was the friend's boss and the last person known to see Hung the night of her disappearance. When police looked into Wallace's past, they found a criminal history that was very long and very violent. At the time that Hung disappeared, Wallace had only been out of prison for only around a year and a half. What had he been in prison for? 2 rapes, and one of his victims had only been 16 years old. On the night that she disappeared, Wallace had picked Hung up and her friend in a white pickup truck. And from there, it was believed that he drove them to a casino. Now, who in the hell takes teenagers to a casino? Now, I just think that seems odd. I mean, I'm probably not the only one that thinks that. But later in the evening, Wallace switched to driving a Cavalier that was either beige or silver in color. The friend asked Wallace to take them home because it was snowing and they both had school the next morning. The friend was dropped off at her home first and said that Wallace told her that he was going to take Hung home next because the house wasn't very far from his. As the friend walked away from the car, she saw Hung get into the front seat. That friend also told police that it had also been Wallace who had asked her if she knew of anyone looking for work, But she thought it was strange because there was barely enough work to keep her busy, so why would they hire somebody else? Now, the friend, who I suppose I should have already mentioned her name, was a lady named Nikki Lee, and she's no relation to Hung at all. They just have a common last name. But in 2020, in a court paper, she told authorities that Wallace made her very suspicious because once in the past, he had served her a drink, and immediately after drinking it, she became violently ill. And when she confronted him about it, he dismissed her, saying that it was probably chemical fumes from his workshop that had made her sick and not to drink. Now, Wallace seemed to be a dead end for the cops, though. He hired a lawyer, then he refused to talk to police. So, yeah, that makes him sound real innocent, right? Well, because of that, the police couldn't arrest him. They had no evidence that led him to believe that he was truly involved in her disappearance, no matter how suspicious he was from his past criminal charges. And we all know that someone can't be arrested just on mere suspicion. In the mid-2000s, Detective Kevin Navarro was put on desk duty when he injured his ankle on a job that he was out on with the police department. Now, while he was on that desk job, his supervisor came to him and asked him if he wanted to look at a cold case file, and he jumped on the opportunity. And as he looked through the case files, one thing stood out to Navarro as he combed through Wallace's history. It was his own dad's name. So Navarro's dad, he had been a cop also in St. Paul, and his name appeared on so many of the older reports related to crimes that Wallace had committed. So Wallace had a very extensive criminal history. And I think knowing that his dad had also arrested or had been on cases with Wallace, it probably drew him in more, wanting to solve this case. Well, time and time again over the years, Wallace's name came up as the prime suspect in Hung's disappearance. And even though he's never been arrested in connection for her disappearance, to this day he remains a person of interest. Now, it seems that Wallace is one sick ticket because report after report from women who have had the unfortunate luck of making his acquaintance have all said that they've had violent run-ins with him. Many reported that he drugged them and they woke up naked and unable to account for an entire day. Others have said that he bound them with either duct tape, a belt, or other such object, tied them to a tree, raped them, and then offered them to other men for sex. The stories of abuse and torture at his hands go on and on. Now, a year after Navarro started investigating the case, he got permission to search Wallace's garage. Several sets of cadaver dogs were brought in to assist in the search. Now, immediately after entering the garage, the dogs immediately just alerted to the back wall of the garage. Permission was given to search further, but the only thing that the ground-penetrating radar that they brought in picked up in that area was a tree trunk buried under the garage in that area. But because he didn't have sufficient evidence, he was unable to get permission to totally tear down the garage to search it. Now, while everyone has that feeling that Wallace's hands are very dirty in this case, we all know that hunches aren't enough to arrest and charge him with murder, mainly because Hung's body has never been found and the case remains a missing person case and not a homicide. Trials without a body are possible, but there has to be so much other evidence against the suspect to even get it to trial. And even if investigators and prosecutors are successful in getting the case to trial, you just still have to convince a jury that this person is guilty. And one thing that you have to understand is that this was back in 1993. There wasn't surveillance cameras everywhere or cell phone data, and that would have been very helpful if it had existed when Hung first went missing. But let's fast forward from then to just about 6 years ago. In August of 2016, police went to a motel in Woodbury, Massachusetts Massachusetts. Y'all, I can't read. It was Minnesota, not Massachusetts. Good Lord. Anyway, the license plate on a car in the parking lot of that motel triggered this welfare check. In the motel room, they found Wallace with a 20-year-old woman who had been a friend of his daughter's while they were in high school. And according to the unidentified woman, she and Wallace had been living in that motel room since the previous February. Apparently, the woman had become homeless, and in the report, police noted that the woman appeared emaciated and she was terrified when they arrived. She also told police that Wallace had raped her, forced her to have sex with other men, and forced her to smoke meth with him. He was often physically abusive with her and had threatened her with a gun. This woman also said that she heard about the murder of a woman in St. Paul, and when she questioned Wallace about it, he told her that the woman entered his business and she never came out. Later, Wallace threatened the woman that they found in the hotel room or motel room with him and said that he would do to her what he had done to the woman in St. Paul, and went on to say that he knew how to get rid of blood and what exactly would cut bones or cut through bones. The woman believed that the murder that he was referring to was hungry. But still, after all these years, there's still no answers in Hung's disappearance. No body, no clues, not anything that closes this case. Even though the family hasn't gotten any of those answers, Hung's family decided to do a ceremonial spirit release that is often performed in their country of origin. And they did that back in April of 2017. The following November, Wallace was sentenced to 54 months in prison for felony kidnapping charges in relation to that incident in the motel and the young lady. And while Wallace was still awaiting sentencing for those charges, he was also brought up on jailhouse charges for throwing a scalding hot cup of water in another inmate's face. In 2019, Wallace became eligible for parole, and when that happened, Navarra, the officer that I was talking about earlier, said he got a phone call from an Anoka County attorney's office telling him that Wallace had applied as a registered sex offender so that he could live in Anoka County when he was released from prison. That attorney was just basically like, no, the fuck you aren't, and that was exactly his words. The state began devising a plan to have Wallace civilly committed as a sexually dangerous person with a sexual psychopathic personality, adding that it was highly likely that he would offend again. And of course, Wallace appealed that, but the appeals court denied it, saying that he had shown that he had a lack of control over his sexual impulses. Now, once he was eligible to be released from prison, he was sent to a facility in Moose Lake, where clients there began to build a readiness to change. But even now, after all these years, Wallace still refuses to give authorities any useful information about Hung's disappearance. Now, this is just speculation on my part, but I think that he probably just doesn't want to talk, because he knows that if he's convicted of murder, he won't be just getting a slap on the wrist like he has for all the other charges that he's been convicted of. Now, as of January of this year, Hung has been missing for 29 years, and she would be 45-year-old. She'd be a 45-year-old woman now. Now, imagine not knowing for 29 years whether your daughter, sister, friend is okay or not. Not knowing where her final resting place is if she's not okay. I can't imagine what horror that must be for her family. Hung's case is one of St. Paul's oldest cold cases, but it remains open and active. That's all I have for tonight's What the Friday. Be sure to come back in the morning for the Weekend Weird Files. Good night, y'all.